A millionaire tested the maid's heart by deliberately opening the safe and placing a hidden camera. When he reviews the footage, he is horrified to see. William Sanders was one of the most respected and influential figures in the bustling capital city. He lived in a stylish townhouse right in the city center, but despite the luxury surrounding him, he was undeniably lonely. Yet, William would never allow himself to admit that, not even in the privacy of his own thoughts. His life was a constant stream of activities, back-to-back meetings, high-stakes negotiations, and countless business trips. There was always another task demanding his attention, leaving no room for personal reflection. Sanders moved through life with the determination and precision of an arrow, always headed toward his next goal. People in his circle couldn't help but envy him, and many admired him from afar. Television shows frequently sought him out, eager to feature his story of success. Journalists lined up for interviews, hoping to extract the secrets behind his meteoric rise. William, ever confident, never hesitated to share his strategies for managing time and growing a business empire. Yet, for all his public appearances and advice, no one ever really got close to him. At 45, he remained a millionaire bachelor, unreachable, as if he occupied a world of his own, untouched by personal relationships or emotions. One particular day, William returned from a business trip to Switzerland, intending only to change clothes before his next engagement. As he stepped inside his immaculate home, Tina, his trusted housekeeper, who had loyally served him for over 8 years, approached him with an unexpected resignation. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sanders," Tina began, her voice filled with regret. "But my family has decided to leave the hustle and bustle of the city. They want to move closer to the sea, and they've asked me to go with them. I hate to leave after all these years. You've become like a son to me. But my daughter-in-law is expecting, and I really want to be there for my grandchildren." Tina's words were sincere, but they seemed to roll right off William. He simply frowned, his face hardening. In his view, family matters always seemed to get in the way of perfectly organized lives. He saw family ties as nothing more than unnecessary complications that interfered with the orderly and disciplined existence he had so carefully crafted. To those around him, William often seemed more like a well-oiled machine than a man, but in the competitive world of big business, this was how one stayed on top. You either kept advancing, ignoring all distractions, or you risked losing everything you had worked for. Without hesitation, William paid Tina generously for her years of service, and without showing any emotion, immediately called his secretary Laura to find a replacement. "Find me a new maid as soon as possible," he instructed. "Make sure she's single and has no children. It would be ideal if she wasn't too attractive. Someone who'll keep to herself, stay home in the evenings, and isn't likely to attract much attention from men. That type will stay on the job for a long time." "Understood, Mr. Sanders," Laura replied promptly, accustomed to his direct and no-nonsense requests. The following morning, William laid eyes on her for the first time. She had a simple and unassuming appearance, a grey, slightly frayed sweater, a black skirt that reached below her knees, and chestnut-colored hair pulled back in a basic ponytail. Her blue eyes were partially hidden behind a pair of glasses, and on her feet were sturdy, old-fashioned boots. She spoke in a soft, hesitant voice, her hands constantly fiddling with the strap of her purse. Just what I needed, Sanders thought, feeling satisfied. As always, Laura had nailed it. But where did she find her? It seemed as if this young woman had stepped out of a museum display overnight. "What's your name?" the millionaire asked, addressing the new housekeeper. "Bella," she replied quietly, avoiding eye contact. "Great, Bella," William said with a nod. "You'll come here every morning, whether I'm around or not, and take care of the cleaning. The linens need to be changed every other day. Make sure to dust the plants and wipe down the glass cabinets daily. When you're done, put on white socks and walk through all the rooms. If the socks stay white, it means you've done the job well and you can leave for the day. If not, I expect the floors to be redone. Got it?" Bella obediently nodded and whispered, "Yes, Mr. Sanders." "Is she always this soft-spoken, or is she playing a game?" William wondered to himself. "She'll need to be tested." Once Bella had left, he walked into his office and opened both of his safes. He moved some cash from one to the other, grabbed a handful of large bills from a bundle, and carelessly tossed them into the empty safe. He then closed the first safe and left the second one slightly open, just enough for it to be noticeable. "Let's see if she's as humble as she looks," William thought smugly, switching on the security camera. The following day, he packed his bags and headed out on a business trip. When he returned 2 days later, the first thing he noticed was a fresh, clean scent in the hallway. He walked through the house, and everything was spotless, not a trace of dust or a single crumb on the floor. First, he decided to take a long bath to unwind. The bathroom gleamed, and on the counter were brand new shampoo, shaving cream, and toothpaste. The maid's attention to detail impressed William. He hadn't mentioned that the toiletries were running low, but she had noticed anyway. After bathing, he slipped into his favorite dark blue terry cloth robe, put on his soft slippers, and made his way to the office. "Up until now, I've been satisfied, but let's see what the footage reveals," William muttered under his breath. Sure, he was exhausted from the flight, but he was the type to make decisions quickly. If she didn't take anything from the safe, I'll have no more doubts about her as a candidate, he thought to himself. He powered on the TV and brought up the camera feed from the room. Rewinding the footage to the right spot, he fast-forwarded through it, sinking into the couch to watch. The scene wasn't exactly gripping. There was the maid, dressed in her black uniform with a white apron, starting to clean the office. She carefully organized the scattered papers and folders on the desk, wiped down the floor, and dusted the desks, bookshelves, and safes. William had seen it all before. The same routine actions, dull enough to nearly lull him to sleep. However, this time, the maid walked across the room in white socks, looking unusually serious and tense, which made Sanders chuckle. He was about to switch off the video, satisfied she hadn't tampered with his money, when suddenly Bella appeared on screen again. Now, she was in her street clothes, a grey sweater and dark blue jeans. She stood in the middle of the office for a moment, seeming unsure. William leaned forward, his focus sharpening on the screen. What was she planning to do? Finally, a look of resolve crossed Bella's face. She walked over to the bookshelves and grabbed a book. The millionaire stood up from the couch, trying to get a better view. Was she borrowing something from his library? He chuckled to himself, thinking, she really must be a book lover. But his amusement turned to shock when he saw Bella wasn't holding a book at all. She had his old photo album. William couldn't believe it. Why would she need his photos? His amazement grew as he watched her flip through the pages on the video, stop at one, and pull out a picture. Glancing around nervously, she quickly stuffed it into her pocket. Anger surged through William Sanders. Was this girl secretly a journalist? A paparazzi who had wormed her way into his house under false pretenses? That's why she tried to seem so innocent. Furious, the millionaire turned off the video and hurried over to the bookshelf. Finding the photo album, he angrily started flipping through its pages. Everything seemed to be in place, except for one missing photo. Feeling drained, William Sanders slumped down onto the couch, letting the album fall to the floor, and stared ahead blankly for what seemed like ages. His mind was completely empty, not recalling anything specific, but deep down, his heart ached with old, long-buried bitterness and disappointment. He couldn't tell how long he had sat there, unmoving. The steady ticking of the clock finally snapped him out of his daze. The wealthy man got to his feet, brushed aside the damp strands of hair that had fallen onto his face, and calmly left the room. Tomorrow, he would instruct Laura to arrange a meeting with the new maid in his office. For now, he was sure of one thing. The next morning, William woke up 10 minutes before his alarm rang, a habit he'd formed over the years. He got out of bed, took a quick shower, and brewed himself a cup of coffee. After finishing his coffee, he dressed and made his way to the office. As usual, Laura greeted him in the reception area. She was wearing a striking red suit, her tall, slender frame making her look as polished as ever. She proudly considered herself the public face of the company. "Good morning, Mr. Sanders," she said brightly. "How was your trip?" "Great, as always," William responded curtly. "Laura, I need a favor." "What do you need, sir?" she asked. "Call the new maid. I need to speak with her in my office." "When should I have her come in?" "The sooner, the better." "All right, Mr. Sanders. I'll call right away," Laura replied. William nodded and disappeared into his office. An hour later, Bella nervously knocked on his door. "Come in," he called out. William, frowning with his arms crossed, watched as the girl awkwardly entered and sat across from him. "So," William began sharply, "confess, what newspaper are you working for?" Bella's eyebrows shot up in shock as she looked at him, utterly confused. "I don't understand what you mean," she stammered. "Oh, I think you do," Sanders said firmly. "I saw everything. There's a camera in my office." Bella went pale and dropped her gaze to the floor. Silence hung in the room for a while. "You mean the photo I took from the album?" the girl finally whispered. "Exactly," William replied. He was furious and frustrated. She's playing the innocent act so well, he thought. Bella glanced up at him with her clear blue eyes. "Yes, I took it, but I swear I'm not a journalist, and I had no intention of publishing it." Her voice rang with a sincerity that caught him off guard. For a moment he wondered if she was just a great actress or if she was actually telling the truth. Then why take the photo? And why... He hesitated, as if gathering the courage to continue. "This one?" Bella's chin quivered, betraying her struggle to hold back tears. "Mr. Sanders, I took it because it shows you with my mother." Her words hit him like a lightning bolt on a clear day. William Sanders was left speechless. "What did you say?" he asked, unsure if he had heard her right. "In the picture I took from your album, that's my mother," Bella quietly repeated. "Your mother?" he asked, still in shock, trying to process it. Bella nodded. "But how is that possible? It can't just be a coincidence," he muttered. Bella met his gaze and nodded again. "Of course it's not," she said, with a hint of contempt. "I knew exactly what I was getting into when I took this job," she added, a sharp edge in her voice. Sanders stood there, stunned. He had suspected Bella was putting on the front of being a quiet, innocent girl, but he never imagined she'd have the audacity to insult him so directly. "How dare you?" he blurted, starting to regain his composure. "You took something that belongs to me, and now you have the nerve to accuse me. How dare you?" Bella met his gaze coolly, unflinching. "I may have taken one thing from you, but you took everything from my mother," she suddenly shot back. William's heart twisted with a painful jolt. "Me? I took something. She betrayed me." Bella's eyes narrowed, and she raised her chin defiantly. "What are you talking about? My mother would never do something like that." But William wasn't listening anymore. Memories from years ago, memories he had tried so hard to bury, rushed back with overwhelming force. He shut his eyes and found himself transported 22 years into the past, to a time when he had just finished college and was on the hunt for his first job. He grew up in a typical family, with no special connections to give him a leg up. Sanders had long understood that he could only depend on himself. Determined, he walked into offices and personally handed his resume to the boss's assistants. Sarah was working as the assistant to the director of a rising logistics company. The first time William caught sight of her striking blue eyes, he felt like he'd been struck by lightning. Her slim figure and fiery red hair completely captivated him. He knew asking for her phone number might be too bold, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Blushing and stumbling over his words, he nervously suggested they meet for lunch. Sarah, with a slight smirk, glanced at his worn-out suit, but agreed. The next day, they met, and William took her to a restaurant far beyond his financial means. He believed she deserved nothing but the best, so without hesitation, he spent the last of his money on fine wine and pricey dishes. Sarah seemed impressed. It was clear she hadn't been to a place like that before, and neither had William. Later, they would laugh about the overly fancy, rich folks sitting at nearby tables. That first lunch led to a second, then a third, and soon a fourth. The more time they spent together, the more they realized how much they enjoyed each other's company. It didn't take long for them to find they could communicate with just a glance or a half-finished sentence. Before long, William knew he couldn't imagine his life without Sarah, and decided it was time for her to meet his parents. He was nervous, but his worries were quickly put to rest. The family dinner went smoothly, and the atmosphere was warm and inviting. His mom and dad couldn't hide their admiration for Sarah, and William's heart swelled with pride. That night, standing on the porch beneath the starry sky, he told Sarah he loved her for the first time. He felt like the luckiest man alive as they held hands tightly. Leaning close, he whispered in her ear, "I want you to be my wife." Sarah chuckled softly and replied, "But you haven't met my family yet. What if you change your mind?" William just shook his head. "Not a chance," he said, and they shared a long kiss under the stars before being called inside for a slice of his mum's famous chocolate cake. The next weekend, Sarah invited William to her home. "Your turn to meet my parents," she announced. Once again, William found himself a bundle of nerves, even more so than the first time. He spent quite a bit of time picking out a shirt, ironing it with care, but to him, it still looked a bit wrinkled. Finally, he finished getting ready and left the house. Sarah's parents lived just a few blocks away, so William decided to walk. On his way there, he stopped to buy flowers and some chocolate for Sarah, her mother, and her younger sister. He struggled to remember her sister's name, as Sarah always referred to her as Dragonfly during their conversations. Just as he reached their home, the name popped into his head: Fiona. Sarah had once mentioned that her younger sister was named after their grandfather. When William knocked on the door, a red-haired girl who appeared to be around 14 years old quickly answered it. "Hi, Fiona," William greeted her warmly. "I'm William, your sister's friend." He had expected a friendly smile in return, but instead the girl frowned slightly, mumbled something under her breath, and disappeared back into the house. With a shrug, William stepped into the spacious hallway. It was clear that Sarah's family was well off, as their home was large and filled with ample space for everyone. A few moments later, Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs. She wore a stunning red dress with a low neckline and a pearl necklace. Her hair was neatly pinned up, accented with a sparkling hairpin. "Oh, I see Dragonfly already let you in," she said brightly upon seeing him. "Yes," and then she vanished just as quickly, he replied with a chuckle. "That's her usual behavior," Sarah laughed, taking the flowers and chocolates from him. "Let's head to the living room. My parents are already waiting for us." William took a deep breath and followed her into the living room. Sarah's parents turned out to be warm and engaging. They asked him about his job, and he eagerly shared his latest updates. He had just landed a job at a reputable investment company. "We're so happy for you, William," Sarah's mother said kindly. "Our daughter mentioned you were searching for a while, and it's a shame her company didn't take you on." "Yes, that's true, but I'm not disappointed," William responded, smiling fondly at his girlfriend. "The most valuable thing I found through Sarah's company was much more precious than any job offer." Sarah smiled back at him, but Fiona, sitting nearby, grimaced at the exchange. She quickly shoved everything from her plate into her mouth and headed straight to her room without a word of thanks. "Fiona really doesn't like me," William whispered to Sarah, his voice filled with uncertainty. Sarah simply waved her hand dismissively in response. "Don't worry about her, sweetie. She's always like that," Sarah said, trying to ease his concern. William wanted to trust her, but something deep down told him she wasn't right this time. Aside from Fiona's cold behavior, the evening had gone off without a hitch. After William kissed Sarah goodbye and left the house, he felt a sense of relief. The stress of the past few days melted away, and he was glad the difficult moments were behind him. Now, he could focus on proposing to Sarah and planning their future together. His new job meant he could afford a bigger place where they could both feel at home. With these hopeful thoughts, William returned to his apartment, took a shower, and drifted into a peaceful sleep. Everything was falling into place, even better than he had hoped. An old friend from college, who now worked as a real estate agent, had found him a stunning apartment downtown that overlooked a gorgeous park. William went to check it out by himself, wanting to surprise Sarah. He wandered through the bright, airy rooms, imagining how Sarah would react. The place felt perfect for them. Without hesitation, William put down the deposit. After that, he headed downtown to shop for an engagement ring. He spent a lot of time weighing his options before finally choosing a delicate, elegant ring featuring a light blue topaz, just like Sarah's eyes, he thought with a smile. He bought the ring on credit, planning to pay it off with his next paycheck. Now, the only thing left was to propose to Sarah. William spent a lot of time going over every detail in his head. He wanted the moment to be beautiful and romantic. While walking downtown, he stumbled upon a small, cozy restaurant where a violinist was playing. He went inside and ordered a cup of coffee. As William sipped his coffee, he sat for a long while listening to the violin, letting his mind wander. He dreamed about a future with Sarah, walking through life together, raising children, having grandchildren, and spending their golden years in a small house by the lake just outside the city. The vision was so vivid, it brought a tear to his eye. He stood up, paid for his coffee, and left with a firm decision. He would bring Sarah here and propose to her while the beautiful sounds of the violin filled the air. The following week came, and everything unfolded seamlessly. Sarah had no suspicions at all. She looked more radiant than ever before. Her soft pink dress highlighted her delicate grace. She had her hair styled in loose, flowing curls that gently tumbled over her shoulders. William felt like everyone around them was captivated by Sarah, and he was filled with pride, knowing that this woman would soon be his bride. In that moment, William felt like the luckiest man alive. He had the woman of his dreams by his side, and work was going better than ever. Life felt almost like a storybook. When the violinist played one of the most touching and soft melodies, William kneeled down and popped the question. Sarah couldn't hold back her tears. The crowd cheered for them. "Will you marry me?" William asked, his eyes brimming with the hope of their future happiness. "Yes," she answered, her voice emotional. "Yes, I will." The guests clapped for the couple once more. William picked Sarah up and spun her around to the sweet sound of the violin. After they returned to their seats, an elderly man with grey hair and a long moustache approached. He wore an old-school plaid jacket and pleated pants. "You two make a beautiful pair," he said in a gentle voice. I'm a retired photographer, and this might sound odd, but I have to share it. 5 years ago, I swore I'd never take another wedding photo. I was so burned out from shooting the same dull events over and over, but the love between you two is different. It's inspired me. Let me take just one picture." Sarah smiled, giving a slight nod of approval. William sat down beside her and wrapped his arm around her, and the photographer captured the moment. A few days later, a copy of the photo was delivered to Sanders's office. William carefully placed the photo in his planner to share with Sarah later. Their wedding was set for the end of April, giving them just over a month to get ready. But, as often happens, life threw a curveball. One morning, William arrived at work and found a note from his boss asking him to stop by his office. Caught off guard and feeling a bit uneasy, Sanders made his way there immediately. On his way, he wondered why the boss had called him in. He really hoped it wasn't because he was about to lose his job for some unknown reason. With the wedding approaching and a move to a new apartment, the timing couldn't be worse. Getting fired now would be devastating. But, as it turned out, William's worries were unnecessary. Right away, he noticed that his boss seemed to be in high spirits. "Good to see you, Sanders," the boss greeted him warmly, wearing a broad smile. "I have some news for you, and I think you're going to like it as much as I do." William smiled back. "I sure hope so." The boss motioned for him to sit, and William took the seat across from him. "Here's the deal," the boss continued. "We're opening our first international branch." "Congratulations," William said sincerely, but his thoughts raced. "What does this have to do with me?" Almost as if reading his mind, the boss continued, "And you, Sanders, have a big role to play in it." "Me?" William was genuinely surprised. "You did outstanding work in college. Your professors gave you top marks, and you've proven yourself to be a bright young professional here as well. We need people like you. That's why I'm appointing you as the manager of the new branch." Before the boss could finish his sentence, William, excited yet anxious, cut in. "I'm honored, sir, but does that mean I'll need to move?" The boss raised an eyebrow. "Is that going to be a problem?" William hesitated for a moment before answering. "Well, the thing is, sir, I'm getting married soon." "How soon?" the boss asked, eyeing him carefully. "In about a month," William replied. The boss cleared his throat, arranging the already neat papers on his desk. "I understand, but this is a big move for the company, and I didn't choose you by chance. I believe in your potential. If you take on this role, you're on the fast track to a future many dream of, but few get the opportunity to pursue. You're one of the lucky ones." William nervously adjusted his tie, feeling a bit overwhelmed. "But what about the wedding? The invitations have already gone out." "Delay it for a little while. You can go, settle into the new role, and then come back, get married, and bring your wife with you. It's simple." But despite the boss's reassurance, William still had his reservations. "Tell me what's really going on," the boss said, his patience wearing thin. William met his gaze. "I'm seriously worried about Sarah," he admitted. "What about her?" The boss scoffed. "Can't she wait a little longer?" His tone was mocking, and Sanders awkwardly nodded in agreement. The boss stood up, pacing the room restlessly. "What kind of love is it if she can't hang on for a few months? What's the rush for a wife like that?" William knew his boss had a point, but the idea of delaying the wedding and leaving Sarah behind twisted something inside him. "Or are you planning to be whipped?" the boss continued to challenge him. "Your entire future is on the line here. Not just yours," he added, "but your future families too. Doesn't she want to live comfortably? Don't you want your kids to have everything they need? Mark my words, you'll be a millionaire soon. Are you really going to let this opportunity slip away?" The boss's words were too convincing, and reluctantly, William gave in. Back at his office, he was barely holding it together, counting down the minutes until the end of the workday. That evening, he and Sarah had made plans to have dinner together. He picked up a bouquet of deep red roses and headed to a restaurant just a few blocks away from his office. He got there first. Sarah had texted, saying she'd be a little late. Sitting at the table, William went over the speech he'd rehearsed for what felt like the 100th time. He had never been this nervous before, his heart heavy with dread. At last, Sarah appeared, wearing a stunning dark blue dress with a low neckline. A silver bracelet gleamed on her wrist, and her hair was swept to one side, showing off long silver earrings. All eyes turned to watch her as she walked toward him. How could I ever leave her behind? He thought, rising to meet her. Sorry, babe. Traffic was brutal, Sarah chirped, hugging him. He handed her the bouquet. They're beautiful. Thank you, sweetheart, she smiled. William helped her into her seat and sat down, clearing his throat. He knew what he was about to say would crush Sarah's good mood, but he couldn't keep it inside any longer. I need to talk to you about something, he said, his voice shaky with nerves. Sarah immediately sensed his unease, and the smile disappeared from her face. What's wrong? She asked, worried. William slowly explained what his boss had said, watching closely for her reaction. Sarah turned pale for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. Of course, I'm disappointed that we have to push the wedding back, but I understand how important your career is, not just for you, but for us and the future we're building together. Your boss has a point. William was stunned. He always knew Sarah was practical and level-headed, but her calm acceptance of the news was more than he expected. Does she even love me? The thought flickered briefly in his mind before he brushed it aside. Thank you, sweetheart, he said. I'm so grateful you understand how much this means. Did you really think I'd make a big fuss over a few months' delay? Sarah chuckled. William let out a laugh too, feeling a weight lift from his chest. Honestly? Yeah, I kind of did. And I also don't have the money to replace all the dishes you might have broken here, she teased. The rest of the night went smoothly, and the next day, William started getting ready for his trip. Their time together became even more precious, knowing the separation was looming. The night before he left, Sarah came over. They sat on the couch, turned on a movie, but neither could focus on it. William inhaled the familiar scent of her perfume, trying to hold on to every small detail. She clung to him, as if not wanting to let go. Around midnight, William mentioned he'd call a cab, but Sarah shook her head. I want to stay with you tonight, she said softly. His heart raced. Are you sure? I thought you wanted to wait until the wedding, he asked. She nodded firmly. I'm sure. I want to be with you tonight. Early the next morning, Sarah left quietly. William asked her not to come to the airport. It would only make the goodbye harder. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving her standing there, crying in front of a crowd of strangers. At the door, as they said their farewells, neither could hold back their tears. I'll message you as soon as I land, William whispered. Sarah nodded. I'll be waiting, she said. I love you. I love you too. And I already miss you. William felt a sudden fear grip him as the door shut. What if he never saw her again? For a split second, he thought about running after her, but he stopped himself. It would seem more than foolish now. Everything had already been decided, and there was no going back. What William didn't know, though, was that Sarah was standing just behind the door. Her hands pressed tightly against her chest, conflicted, unsure if she should knock or walk away. When William arrived in the new country, he was welcomed with an unexpected warmth. Everyone treated him with a level of respect that left him surprised and somewhat overwhelmed. Being in such an unfamiliar place made him feel even younger and less experienced than ever before. At first, adjusting to this new life wasn't easy. He felt out of place, unsure of how he would manage, but slowly, he began to adapt. Each day, his duties felt less overwhelming, and he got into a routine. But no matter how busy his days were, he made sure to call and message Sarah every single day. The days flew by, and with each passing one, the thought of seeing Sarah again made him excited. They were both looking forward to their reunion. William had already purchased his plane ticket, only 2 more weeks to wait. That evening, like every other, he picked up the phone to call Sarah, but her phone was off. That's odd, he thought. She had never turned off her phone before. He waited for an hour and tried again. Still, the phone went straight to voicemail. He spent the entire evening calling, but there was no answer. The next morning, a message finally came. "Forgive me, William." His heart pounded as he read the rest. "I've met someone else, and I've fallen in love with him." William stared at the message in disbelief, his hands shaking so much he nearly dropped his phone. He immediately dialed her number again, desperate for an explanation, but she didn't pick up. A minute later, another message came through. "Don't call me anymore." William was frozen in shock. His grip tightened on his phone, and for a brief moment, he felt an urge to smash it against the wall. How could she do this? After everything she had said, all the promises she made, he had been waiting for her like a fool, believing in their future together. And now she had thrown it all away just like that. He frantically dialed her number again, but there was no answer. "Don't call me anymore," she texted a minute later. William could barely stop himself from throwing the phone against the wall. How could she? After everything she had said to him, and he, like an idiot, had been waiting for their reunion. She had just betrayed him. William collapsed onto his bed and, unable to hold back, burst into tears. By the evening, he had a fever. He called the office and said he wouldn't be coming to work the next day. He slept through the entire next day. The fever had eased, but William still couldn't get up or force himself to do anything. He just wanted to forget. Thankfully, it was Saturday, and he didn't have to go into the office. He spent the whole day in bed again, barely touching his food. On Sunday, he got into the company car and drove out of town. He wandered through the fields for hours, trying not to think. But he couldn't shake the image of Sarah from his mind. The girl he had loved stood in his thoughts, as if she were still there. No matter how hard William tried, he couldn't shake the feelings he had for her. "I need to let her go," he muttered to himself. She had chosen someone else. When he got home, Sanders returned the plane ticket, took a long shower, and shaved, determined to start fresh without Sarah. He blocked her number so he wouldn't keep obsessively checking for messages or calls. By Monday, he was back at work, diving headfirst into the routine of his everyday life, letting the whirlwind of activity consume him. William made it a point to focus only on the present. No lingering on the past, no worrying about the future. He was determined to take on whatever opportunities life threw his way, and with each step forward, he found success, rising higher and higher. Eventually, Sanders left the company that had given him so many chances, went back to his homeland, and started his own business. Fortune was on his side, and his venture thrived. Before long, William became one of the wealthiest and most successful people in the country. "So, what do you think my mother did?" The question, cold as ice, snapped him out of his thoughts. He blinked and focused on Bella's face. She stared at him with hostility. She found someone else just 2 weeks before the wedding. "Isn't that enough?" he snapped back, frustration building. Bella's expression shifted to surprise as she looked at him, clearly taken aback by his response. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, confused. William stood up and turned to face the window, Old feelings of hurt, frustration, and hopelessness came flooding back. "She kept this from me," he said bitterly. Bella stayed silent, her gaze lowering. Whatever anger she had felt toward the millionaire was starting to fade. Something in his stance and the way he spoke made her rethink her judgment of him. "I don't know the whole story, but I think there's been a misunderstanding," she whispered. "My mother was already pregnant with me 2 weeks before your wedding." William's head snapped toward her, disbelief written all over his face. "What? That's impossible!" Bella bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. "My mum told me you spent the night together right before you left. That's when I was conceived." William ran his hand through his hair nervously and sank back into his chair. He closed his eyes, his face contorted with pain, as if struggling to absorb the weight of the situation. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, still not meeting her gaze. "Just don't lie to me. Please." His tone was almost pleading now. "I know what people are capable of for money." His eyes moved toward Bella, who stood before him, her face drained of all color. She looked as pale as if the blood had left her body entirely. "I know you don't trust me," she murmured, her voice soft and strained. "But I need to find the truth for myself." Her hands trembled slightly as she continued. "I always dreamed of meeting my father and of knowing what it feels like to be loved as a daughter. That's something I've been denied my entire life. My mum always told me he was dead." She paused, glancing down as if searching for the strength to continue. "But one day, I found her diary. That's when I learned everything." William's eyes lingered on her, filled with uncertainty. His heart was conflicted, torn between disbelief and a growing compassion for her. He no longer saw her as just a schemer or manipulator. There was something in the way she spoke, in the way her eyes reflected her pain, that made her seem so fragile, almost broken. Against his better judgment, he felt a wave of protectiveness wash over him. He wanted to wrap his arms around her, comfort her, and tell her everything would be okay. In that moment, she seemed less like a stranger and more like a lost child. He longed to stroke her hair and whisper words of reassurance, to give her a sense of safety and hope for what was to come. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "There's only one person who can give us the truth," he said decisively. "It's Sarah." Bella flinched slightly, fear flickering in her eyes. "But she doesn't know I'm here," she confessed, her voice shaky. "I got this job working for you without her knowledge." She looked away for a moment, her nervousness growing. She doesn't think very highly of you. I've heard her say more than once that you're a coward and a scoundrel when she sees you on TV." William felt his chest tighten, a wave of bitterness rising within him. So, that's what Sarah really thought of him. The sting of her words cut deep. He clenched his fists, forcing the emotion down. Then, with a decisive movement, he stood up and walked around the table, his hand extended toward Bella. "Let's go," he said with determination. "We need to get to the bottom of this as soon as possible. Your mother owes us the truth." They left his office together, the tension between them thick and unspoken. As they stepped into the elevator, neither spoke a word. Up until they reached the ground floor, where an expensive car was waiting for them, with an elderly chauffeur opening its doors, there was complete silence. "Where to, Mr. Sanders?" the chauffeur asked respectfully as William nodded toward Bella. She gave the address in a quiet voice, and the car pulled away from the curb, heading into the city. The ride was filled with heavy silence. Neither William nor Bella exchanged any words, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, the car came to a stop in front of a grand, well-kept house. William stepped out first, his heart pounding slightly with unease as he gazed at the home. "Is Sarah home?" he asked, his voice betraying a trace of anxiety. "Yes," Bella replied softly. "She's working from home." For a moment, William hesitated. Perhaps he should warn Sarah that they were coming and give her a chance to prepare herself for what was about to unfold. But Bella shook her head firmly, her eyes steady. "No," she said. "We need to do this now. If we catch her off guard, she won't have time to hide anything." Swallowing his nerves, William nodded, though he could feel his stomach twist with tension. Bella reached into her purse and pulled out a small key. She inserted it into the lock and opened the front door. They stepped inside, into the bright hallway, the scent of fresh flowers lingering in the air. "Mom, it's me," Bella called out, her voice echoing slightly. "Is everything all right?" came a familiar voice, the sound hitting William like a punch to the chest. He hadn't heard that voice in years. "I have a guest with me who wants to see you," Bella announced. "Who is it?" came the woman's reply, and William heard the soft scrape of a chair being pushed back across the floor. In just a few moments, Sarah appeared in the doorway. She was dressed in an elegant dark green dress, layered with a white cardigan draped over her shoulders. Her hair, though shorter than it had been in her youth, still retained that same deep red color, cascading in thick waves down to her shoulders. It had lost none of its vibrancy. William noticed that her gaze, too, had stayed the same. Those striking blue eyes, filled with the same mischief he remembered so well, the kind that had once drawn him in. But the moment Sarah's eyes met his, her expression froze. Her shock was evident, and in an instant her hand flew to cover her mouth, as though to stifle whatever emotions might spill out. "Hello, Sarah," William spoke softly, his voice almost trembling. His hand shook slightly, and his heart beat so hard in his chest it felt as if it might burst. Sarah, still shaken, quickly gathered herself, her shock fading into a harsh, guarded expression. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice cold, her arms crossing tightly across her chest as she looked at him with a sharpness that had not been there before. "I came to find out the truth," William said simply, though his voice was strained. "What truth do you think you're looking for?" Sarah responded, her tone edged with bitterness. At that moment, Bella, sensing the rising tension, interjected. "Mom, are we just going to stand here in the hallway? Let's go into the living room." Sarah's eyes flickered toward her daughter, and her harsh expression softened just a little. Without saying a word, she turned and walked into the living room, with William silently following her, and Bella closing the door behind them. Once everyone had settled into the living room, an almost unbearable silence filled the space. The tension between Sarah and William was thick, making the air feel heavy. Sensing this, Bella, feeling out of place, quietly excused herself and left the room. As soon as she was gone, William, no longer able to hold back, spoke up, as if the years of silence between them had suddenly vanished. "Why are you so angry with me?" he asked, his voice tight with unresolved emotions. "You were the one who stopped answering my calls, and then you wrote me a letter saying you'd met someone else and fallen in love, that it was over between us." Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief, her brow furrowing as confusion mixed with the hurt in her expression. "What? I never wrote that," she exclaimed, her voice rising slightly. "I was pregnant, waiting for you to come back so I could tell you in person. I didn't want to do it over the phone. But instead, you just disappeared and blocked me. I didn't hear from you again." William stared at her, his frustration surfacing. "Are you saying I imagined it all?" he shot back, his voice trembling with the weight of the misunderstanding. Sarah's gaze softened momentarily as she looked at him, her confusion deepening. A look of doubt crossed her face, and for a moment, her eyes seemed to cloud over, as though she was trying to piece something together in her mind. "Wait," she said slowly, her voice quieting. "Just before everything happened, I lost my phone. I was sure I had left it at the next stop, but when I went back to get it, it was gone. The following day, I found it under my pillow. It was strange because I had no memory of placing it there, but the moment I saw it, I was so relieved to have it back that I didn't stop to question it. I thought I'd see a stream of missed calls and messages from you. But when I unlocked the phone, the screen was completely empty. I decided to call my number, but all I heard was a message saying it had been blocked. I sat on the bed, feeling a bit disoriented, when my sister walked into the room. She asked me how I was doing, and I told her about not being able to reach you. "Maybe he's found someone else," Fiona said with a careless shrug, then turned and left the room without much concern. Her indifference left me feeling even more helpless. I looked down and shrugged my shoulders in defeat. William, sensing her hesitation, asked, "But did you really believe her?" "She never liked me from the very beginning," I said, trying to gather my thoughts. "She probably didn't want us to get married. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me at all if she took my phone and sent those messages to drive us apart." He fell silent, unsure of how to express the frustration building inside me. It was true. Fiona had always been rebellious. She had never approved of their relationship, and she definitely didn't support the idea of their marriage. "She was jealous," Sarah confessed, her voice trembling. "Jealous that I had you." And with that, she couldn't hold back the tears any longer. "What's wrong?" William asked, his voice trembling with concern. He wanted to hold her close and never let go. "She ran away when she turned 18. We have no idea where she is or even if she's alive. It nearly drove our parents insane with worry. It really took a toll on them." "I'm sorry, Sarah," William whispered softly. He hesitated but finally walked over and sat beside her, wrapping her in a gentle hug, afraid she might push him away. But instead, Sarah leaned into him, crying even harder. They sat like that, holding each other, until she calmed down. "So, Bella is my daughter?" William asked cautiously. Sarah only nodded. "I'm sorry things ended up like this," Sanders said bitterly. "I'm sorry I missed out on her birth and watching her grow." His voice carried the weight of regret and loss. Sarah ran her hand softly through his hair. "But you're here now. No, you can't change what's happened. But you have the present. And now that Bella has found you, she needs you more than ever." The millionaire lifted his head, a new sense of purpose in his eyes. "And I'll be there," he promised, then turned to Sarah with tenderness in his gaze. "And what about you? Do you need me?" Sarah smiled and nodded. "Yes, I do. I could never forget you, William Sanders." Hearing those words, William felt like the luckiest man alive. He held tightly to the woman he had always loved, and for the first time in 22 years, he let himself imagine a bright future. And now, he was sure that future would become a reality. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed this story, please support the video by giving it a like and leaving a comment. Thank you so much.